Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of hashtag SciChat. And yeah, I still like to say the hashtag SciChat just because I like to throw hashtags into conversation. But in fact, we are no longer, doing the hashtag Twitter chat version of SciChat. We of course have moved to a Facebook group, and that's where you can partake in the awesomeness that is SciChat. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit more about it, but what SciChat is, why you should go do that. But I'm going to do it at the end of the video this week instead of explaining everything. If you've heard all about what SciChat is before in the past, I don't want to bore you before I get into it. But if you're listening to this for the first time, you're curious more about how you can get involved in an awesome community of scientifically grounded marketers, listen at the end of the video, and I will get into that. So this week's topic, and I say this every week really, but this week's topic is retweets. And what I say every week is that this is my favorite topic, but retweets truly are my original favorite topic, right? They were one of the first things that I started studying when I started doing scientific marketing, started doing social media science. And the reason is because if you were to draw how viral marketing works, what the concept of viral marketing is, if you were to draw that out, right, you would essentially be drawing a pattern of somebody gets an idea, they spread it to a couple people, they spread it to a few people, they spread it to a few people, etc. And you'd have this branching kind of tree diagram. And then, you can draw the way Facebook sharing works or the way, email forwarding works, but there are a few things as simply and elegantly congruent with that idealized map of what viral marketing is as the mechanism of retweeting. So you take that, and then you add to the fact that Twitter's API is so open that I can gather huge data sets about the way retweeting works. I can do all kinds of really interesting analysis about how to get more retweets and why people retweet things. And you've got the recipes for, as I like to say all the time, my favorite topic, but realistically, my original favorite topic to do research on. So that's what this week's topic is. And of course, like I said, I do social media scientist. I call myself a social media scientist. That is my official title at HubSpot. And what I like to do is use science, right? Use experimentation and data to hunt down what I call unicorns and rainbows, superstitions and myths about social media marketing, specifically in marketing in general as well, right? There's a lot of like kumbaya kind of stories in marketing you'll hear, like engage in the conversation, be awesome, and stuff that it sounds good because it's hard to disagree with that stuff. But as a unicorn hunter, as a social media scientist, as a marketer who likes to ground his practices in science and data, I take aim at these things and I go hunting, unicorn hunting, if you will, to figure out why people retweet things. Right, and normally when you ask somebody, why did somebody retweet this thing? Why did you retweet that video? Why did you retweet that link? Why did this other person retweet this picture? The first answer a lot of people will give you is because it was good, and that's a tough thing to disagree with until you start to think about Rebecca Black's first video, the Friday video, right? It spread all over the web, tons of views on YouTube, tons of shares on Facebook, tons of retweets on Twitter. Because it wasn't good, right? The idea that something spreads or something gets retweets simply because it's good is untrue. It's just not. It's far too simplistic. The reason that things spread is because they're good at spreading, right? And in the full version of my Science of Social Media presentation, I talk more about that and explain the evolutionary background for that. But suffice it to say that it is a pretty safe conjecture that things don't spread, things don't get retweeted just because they're good. They get retweeted because they're retweetable, which is admittedly a made-up term, but I use it to indicate the separate set of characteristics that lead a piece of content to being retweeted. And that's what this presentation is designed to do, is to break down what are those other characteristics, right? When somebody tells you to be remarkable, that's not particularly useful advice unless they tell you what remarkable means, because the word only means able to be remarked on. Like if you say, how do I get people to talk about me? And then somebody says, well, you say something worth talking about. That's a tautology, right? That's circular logic. You need to break down what it means, what motivates people to talk about something, what motivates somebody to retweet a specific tweet. And that's the goal of my work in general and this presentation specifically. So what we have here is an analysis I did where I looked at Twitter accounts and I analyzed the percentage of their tweets that contained a link, right? So the link containing percentage, right? And that's that bottom axis there, the horizontal axis. Okay. And then to that I compared the percentage of those accounts' tweets that were retweeted, right? So retweets per tweet essentially. And what I found is that accounts that tweet somewhere between 60 and 80% links, right? And really it's between 20% and 80% links, but the biggest parts are to the right of that graph. So sharing content, sharing links is what gets retweets, right? Is one of the behaviors that gets retweets. And in fact, if your account gets known, develops a reputation for being an account that shares a lot of interesting content, that's how you get a ton of retweets, right? And linking and image sharing and those kind of things are the easiest ways to get are easy ways to get content into a tweet and then have them be shared. They're of course not the only way to do that. In fact, I've gotten a lot of retweets on just quotes, right? But what these things are is that they're all a link, a quote, an image. These are all content things, right? These are all pieces of value, right? Content, not replying. Okay, and that's really what you need to compare it to, because then when you do the same kind of analysis and you compare the percentage of the tweets of the accounts in my study that started with an @ sign, so the reply percentage, and in this case it's the percentage of tweets beginning with an @ sign that is that horizontal axis, that bottom axis, and then the vertical axis is the same, it's percentage of tweets retweeted. What you find is that as an account gets more conversational, as an account spends a higher percentage of their tweets engaging in the conversation, replying, the number of times they're retweeted decreases. So it is not this engage in the conversation thing that gets retweets, right? In fact, there's a negative relationship here between engaging in the conversation and getting a lot of retweets. So rather than engaging in the conversation, you need to add to the conversation. That's a quote that I put in my third book, Zarella's Hierarchy of Contagiousness, that nobody cares how chatty you are unless you're contributing to the conversation. Right? And that's the best way to be social, is to contribute to the conversation, not just reply and say, yeah, that's cool. Actually say the thing that's cool, right? And so that's an important thing that we have to understand when we think about retweeting in this regard, is that it is a different motivator. I'm motivated by very different things to retweet you than I am when I decide that I'm going to reply to you. Right? Getting into a conversation with you is can be an indicator that I disagree with you. I might agree with you, but disagreement is a pretty powerful motivator for me to reply to you. I'm probably not going to retweet you if I disagree with you, right? So when we're talking about retweets, we have to understand that there's a very specific set of motivators, and it's not just good content or remarkable content. It's specifically retweetable content, which is a very specific set of characteristics, one of which is contains content. So be that a link, be that an image. We'll talk about more about images in a little bit. Another thing that makes content retweetable is calls to action. Right now, I've talked about calls to action quite a bit, social calls to action specifically quite a bit in the past, and I get some pushback. In fact, I've had video debates with folks in the industry. One of them is David Meerman Scott. If you Google that up, you can find a debate that I had with him about asking for retweets and social calls to action. As marketers, we had gone for decades. Centuries, really. In fact, I have a book in my collection, I have a small collection of old books. One of them is about advertising, and one of the lessons that you learn from this book is to be, what's the call to action? What are you asking people to do? What's the ask, right? And we've been doing this for decades. Offline, we moved online. In email marketing, nobody would ever dream of sending an email that doesn't have a call to action in it. When you're doing display advertisement, pay-per-click advertisement, landing page optimization, calls to action, calls to action, calls to action, and no marketer bats an eye about the importance of calls to action in marketing. right? But suddenly, when we moved to social media, calls to action became unpopular, right? It became uncool to ask people to do what you're trying to get them to do, right? And make no mistake about it, marketing is manipulation. Marketing is the outcome of marketing, the desired outcome of marketing. Your goal as a marketer is to get people to take a specific action that they may not have already taken. It doesn't mean it's a negative thing. You're not trying to trick people into doing bad things, but you're trying to nudge them in a specific direction. You're trying to get them to do something specific. And in order to do that, we have to actually ask them to do that at some point. You may surround that ask with all sorts of trust and all sorts of motivations and all kinds of other things, but at the end of the day, you need to ask. And so what I did here is I compared 3 buckets of randomly selected tweets. Right? Tens of thousands of randomly selected tweets. And I broke them down into 3 buckets. The first bucket were tweets that contained the phrase, please retweet. The second bucket were tweets that contained the phrase, please RT. And the third bucket were tweets that contained neither one of those 2 calls to action. What I did then is I compared the percentage of each of these 3 buckets that were retweeted. Okay, meaning did they get a retweet or not, like 1 or 0 binary, retweeted or not. And what I found is that in the please retweet bucket, the bucket of tweets that contain the phrase please retweet, 51% of them were retweeted. And you can see the confidence intervals and the plus or minuses and all that stuff here as well. In the please RT bucket, 39% of those tweets were retweeted. And then in the bucket where the tweets did not have any call to action, or either one of those 2 call to actions at least, only about 12% of them were retweeted. So clearly, there is at least a very strong correlation between the inclusion of the phrase please retweet or please RT and a tweet being retweeted. Now, there are other factors. This does not prove causation. To quote Edward Tufte, correlation is not causation, but it is a hint. So what I encourage you to do is not just to say, okay, well, please retweet works. I mean, the data shows that it does, and you're going to find out that it does in a second. But don't take my word for it. Take my word only as a suggestion of something to experiment with. Right? So the next time you tweet a link, or the next time you make a quote, right? You tweet something that's quotable, right? Stick the phrase please retweet or please RT on the end of it. And then maybe a couple days later, tweet the same thing without the call to action on it, or vice versa. It's not a perfectly scientific test because of the time differences and repeating content and all that kind of thing. But try it out a little bit. After a little while, you'll get an understanding of whether or not it works for you. And I have a strong inclination that it's probably going to work for you. Of course, you don't want to do the please retweet thing every single time you tweet. But if you use it in cases where you think it'll be useful, it'll be helpful for you, certainly if you're sharing other people's content just to be a source of interesting content, like I often recommend that you do on Twitter, you don't need to use please retweet for those things. But then when you start retweeting your own pieces of content to use that reach and reputation that you've built sharing other people's kinds of content, use the please retweet when it comes time to share your content, right? This one is one of my most quoted pieces of data in existence. And I've looked at it a number of ways. I've looked at it, from a number of different data sources, and the graphs all roughly look the same. Retweet activity tends to be the highest around 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. Right. And like I said, I've done this graph in a number of different ways with a number of different data sets across multiple years. Several years have gone in between, various updates of this data, and various methodologies to determine retweetability. And this is one of the newer examples of it. Here I'm looking at the number of times tweets were retweeted. In earlier examples of this graph, I was looking at just raw retweet activity, and both methods identify, and every time I look at it, identify roughly the same time period, about 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern time. Tends to be the most retweetable time of day. Tweets published at that time tend to, at least according to my multiple data sources, get the most retweets. Now, the only great example, or the only great explanation I have for this, is that it's just a sort of messing around time. At the end of the day, work starts to slow down, you start thinking about going home, you're a little tired, you're not as witty as you were earlier in the day, so you're just flipping through Twitter, Twitter, you're probably not going to come up with anything great for yourself to tweet, so you're much more likely just to retweet other people. Right, it's a little looser part of the day, and so again, don't take this as a rule that you should only tweet at that time of day, but certainly take it as an experiment, as a suggestion to experiment with. If you find yourself you're thinking about tweeting something, you think it might get some retweets, and you're thinking about posting it at 10 a.m., hold off one day or a couple days and tweet it at 4:35 p.m. Eastern time and see how it does for you. Right, and see if that works for you. Again, it's one of those things where I'm often very surprised. This is a mistake graph there, but a lot of this data is surprising in that it seems like simple stuff, right? And it seems like simple stuff and stuff that, on some level, certain types of marketing folks want to disagree with it, like the please retweet thing. Or the time of day thing, it can't be that simple is what it seems like. It can't be like, oh, just asking for retweets is what gets it, or there's some magical time. I'm not saying the time is magical, but experiment with it, and you'll often be surprised at how well these things work. At least for many brands and many accounts. So what I did here is I looked at self-reference, right? So self-reference is basically measuring the number of times a piece of content contains words like I, me, we, words that are self-referential, words that are talking about yourself or your brand. And I compared a large selection of non-retweeted tweets, right? So non-retweetable tweets, so the black bar there, versus tweets that were retweeted. That's the orange bar there. And what I found is that retweeted tweets tended to contain lower amounts of self-reference. Meaning, talking about yourself is not a great way to get retweets, probably. Right? So talking about yourself, if I follow you on Twitter and you're a brand, or even if you're just a person, and all you do all day long is talk about yourself, imagine you're at a networking party, right? You're at a cocktail party. And there's one person in the crowd who does nothing but talk about themselves the whole time. We all know somebody like that, right? It gets really boring after a while, unless they just came from wrestling a bear or something, or stopping a zombie outbreak, or whatever, something super crazy. But generally speaking, the people who just talk about themselves the whole night aren't talking about anything that's super interesting. And so think about that when you're on Twitter. Why, if you wouldn't do that in person, why are you going to do that on Twitter, and why are you going to expect me to retweet you? Now, if you're a personal brand and you're on Twitter just to make friends, then fine, talk about yourself. But I would imagine a lot of us are on Twitter to do good things for our companies, and self-reference, whether it is talking about actually us, ourselves, or just our brand all day long, is not a great way to do that. So slow down on that. Another, point, and I've made this point a little bit earlier, just to reiterate though, when you look at retweets, again, it's that same kind of breakdown of non-retweeted tweets versus tweets that were retweeted. And you look at tweets that were retweeted, and you look at the percentage of them that contain a link. It's a little over 50% of them. But then if you look at non-retweeted tweets, it's under 25% of them that contain a link, meaning link-containing tweets are more retweetable. And I think that's just a symptom, just a phenomena of that preference for content sharing that leads to things being retweetable, right? So if you're just chit-chatting or not saying anything all that important, all that interesting, then I'm probably not going to retweet you. Like if you're just talking about yourself, then I'm probably not going to retweet you. But if you found some interesting piece of content out on the web somewhere, or you found an interesting photograph, or you made sense, an interesting kind of quote type thing, that's when I'm going to retweet you, when I'm sharing something of value, because I want to have a Twitter account that people think of as a place to go and find interesting stories and interesting content. So excuse me, it only makes sense that, I'm going to share the things from your account by retweeting them when they're interesting, and I think my followers are going to get value out of it. So links are one of the easiest ways to provide value. But when you go a step further, and I looked at a large data set of links or tweets that contained links, right? And specifically retweeted tweets that contained links. So tens of thousands of tweets that were retweeted at least once that had a link in them, right? And used Bitly so I could count the clicks. And what I found is that 14.64%, so roughly 15% of the retweeted tweets, of the tweets that were retweeted, nobody had ever clicked on the link in that tweet. Okay, so think about that for a second. 15% of the tweets in my data set that were retweeted, somebody clicked the retweet button. Nobody had ever clicked on the link. Okay, and then to go a step further, a full 16% had more retweets than clicks, right? Which means that there was a significant amount of activity in this data set where people were retweeting links, retweeting tweet-containing links without reading the link themselves. So what were they reading? Right? What was making them retweet that content? It wasn't even the content behind the link. It was A, the presence of the link, and B, the tweet text that went along with the link, which for most cases is going to be the headline of the article, the title of the article, right? So as a content producer, we really need to think long and hard about the headline, because in a certain percentage of cases, that is going to be the thing solely that determines whether or not I'm going to retweet you, right? You could have the greatest content in the world, and sometimes 15% of people who are potentially going to retweet that tweet are never even going to see that. If the headline is good, they'll still retweet it. Now, there is, of course, 85% of the retweets did have clicks or had more clicks than they had retweets, which means that there are a lot of people reading the links and then retweeting as well. But it is that headline, again, that's drawing their attention. So as a content producer, one of the most important things you can do to make your content retweetable is to spend a lot of time thinking about how the headline of the article is going to translate to Twitter. How is that headline that you're writing, if you saw that on Twitter accompanied by a link, would you want to A, retweet it, and B, click on that link? Right? So don't, and so what you'll see a lot of content producers, especially folks who, come from more of like a creative writing kind of background, they tend to do this thing where they like bury the lead, or they'll, sort of write a more creative-y headline, and it's funner. And as far as literature goes, it's more interesting to write a title that is sort of, part of the art of the whole article, right? If you're writing long-form content. To think about the title of your blog post like a book, right? So if you think of some of the famous books out there, like I'm just looking at my bookshelf right now, there's some books on it. If you think of As I Lay Dying by Faulkner, that title, the book is great, but the title isn't going to make me think that I want to read it necessarily without the rest of it, right? And so you really need to take a step back from that creative writing, that literature methodology and mindset, and think about how you are selling the importance, the retweetability, and the clickability of your content when you're writing headlines. And a part of that is novelty, right? Meaning when you do that breakdown of retweeted tweets and non-retweeted tweets, and again, the non-retweeted tweets are the black bar here, and the retweeted tweets are the orange bar here. And then you look at word occurrence. That is basically how common words are. So the word "the" has a very high word occurrence score. The word sesquipedalian has a very low word occurrence score. What you find is that retweeted tweets tend to have much lower word occurrence scores, like total word occurrence scores. So the words in retweeted tweets tend to be rarer. So when you're writing a headline or you're writing a tweet and you're aiming for retweets, you need to think about saying something that's different from what everybody else out there is saying. Because if you're saying the same things that everybody else is saying, then I'm not going to be particularly interested in your version of it unless you're a super famous person or whatever. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't talk about trends that are happening in your industry, in your space. You can do that, right? If you write some sort of blog where Miley Cyrus content is going to be relevant, then great, talk about her. That's a big topic. But you need to think about a way to take an entirely new angle on it and to communicate that in the title of your article or in your tweet in that short 140 characters. Think about how to communicate simply and effectively and at a glance that your version, your content is different, is unique, is novel. because novelty is a very important thing in all kinds of content sharing, all kinds of virality of content of information, and especially on Twitter, right? I'm not going to retweet you if you're saying the same things that everybody else is saying. And then when we look at the most retweetable words, that is the words and phrases that occurred in retweets with a much higher occurrence than you would have expected them to occur based on their occurrence score in non-retweeted tweets. And what you find is that, well, A, the word you is right at the top of the list, meaning it's the opposite of self-reference, right? Like if the word me was here, then I would say talk about yourself all day long, but it's not. The word you is here, meaning talk about your audience, talk to your audience, tell your audience what your content is going to do for them. 10 ways you can make more money, that kind of stuff. That one's a little hacky, but you get my point. Some of the other things on this list, you'll see that, of course, please retweet occurs here. Free, number 8, free stuff is always awesome. People love it. 14 is 10. You have 17 is top. You think about top 10 lists. Chunked content and easy to read, easy to digest content is great. How-tos are also awesome because they communicate the scent. They give off the scent of utility and useful information and valuable information. And then, of course, new blog post is on this list as well, meaning that if I'm following you on Twitter, right, that's because I like your content, and if you tell me that you've just produced something new, I'm going to be interested in that because I've already said, yeah, hey, I like your content. Tell me when you got something new. So what I like to do is when I tweet out a new blog post, I'll actually write new blog post on it so people know that that is a new blog post because people like novelty and newness, especially when you're talking about getting more retweets, etc. And then the flip side of this coin, I really don't want to leave this graph up all that much, only because it's super boring, and I think really that's the thing. So it's full of a lot of like self-referential words, like the tweet. If you were to compose a tweet out of all of these, it would be something like watching the game and going to bed because I'm tired. See you tomorrow. Right? It really would. I'm bored. Tired, bored, sleep, bed. Well, sort of non-fluency words like well, lol, hey. So boring, sort of chatty, and beyond just being self-referential, they're boringly self-referential, right? Nobody's using these words to talk about how they just stopped the zombie outbreak. They're using these words to describe how they're bored and how they're going to bed. And so, that's really the key. So don't think that these words are sort of, unmagical words, and the other list is magical words. But think about the behavior behind the words in the most retweetables list, and compare that to the behavior behind the words on the least retweetables list, because the difference there is that one is talking about value. The most retweetable words are talking about value that you as the audience can get from this thing, talking about value that's presented in an easy to read way like a top 10 list or a how-to, versus I'm going to bed because I'm bored and tired, you're going to sleep, that sort of stuff. And really think about that. How are you presenting your information in such a way that that is interesting and not like the words on this list here? And then when you look at the length of tweets, you find that longer tweets tend to get more retweets, out to about 110, 120 characters, because once you get past 110, 120 characters, then it becomes hard to retweet you by using the old like RT at syntax, which I prefer. But generally speaking, if you can go out to about 100 characters, that gives you the most words to communicate the value in retweeting something. So write as long as you can, but don't go too long. I tend to aim for 100, 110 characters or so. Tweets with hashtags do tend to get retweeted more often. I think that's simply because they are, if I'm partaking in a Twitter chat, if I'm at a specific event, if there's a hashtag that's trending or that a lot of people are watching it and my tweet is relevant to that, I can insert my tweet into that stream and reach people that are potentially not following me, which gives me a higher reach, which gives me more chances to get retweeted. Quotes, like I said before, that's another, it's not a link, it's not an image, it's just a way to package a useful, valuable piece of content. Rather than just being chatty, you're actually saying something that's quotable. And typically a good quote is something that can be taken out of context and still provide value. And that's really important for retweeting, because while you may be tweeting several different things in a row and somebody following you can read everything in context and understand what you mean, once somebody retweets you, there's going to be a lot of people seeing it who weren't part of the original context. So you really have to think about using quotes. Tweets using pic.twitter.com are 90% 94% more likely to be retweeted. Pick.twitter.com is Twitter's own image uploading service, and what that does, like when you're using TweetDeck or Twitter.com, it shows the image right in the tweet stream, and so it catches my eye. I can see what the picture is. You're providing that value up front, and you're making it's so obvious that there's value. There's a piece of content there that I can share, and it's so. But if you compare that to like using Instagram links, which when I see an Instagram link, I know that it's an image there, but it's not as easy for me to see the image because I have to click it. The Twitter cards don't work for Instagram anymore, so it's got to go over to Instagram.com. So then if I'm going to share it, I'm just going to like it on Instagram rather than actually retweeting it. So if you're aiming for retweets, typically, use the Twitter image uploading as opposed to Instagram, or as opposed to, TwitPic is good. It's more Twitter oriented. And then the other one I looked at was FB images. So the FB CDN, so when you upload an image to Facebook, it's stored on this Facebook content delivery network, and so if you right click, copy image URL, and then tweeted that link, you typically get fewer retweets because again, it doesn't have that great image integration, integration right into the stream that the pic.twitter.com images do. So that's this week's edition of SciChat about retweets, and as promised, I want to explain a little bit more now about what SciChat actually is. So SciChat is really two things, one of which is what you just heard, which is every week we release a 30-minute video that talks about data, about some specific online marketing topic, typically social media or inbound marketing in general. But then the other more important part, I think, of SciChat, and the more awesome part of SciChat, is a community on Facebook of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, closing in on 1,000, scientifically grounded marketers who are interested in applying the scientific methods of data and experimentation and hunting unicorns in social media. And so that's where the video gets posted, is to that Facebook group, and it's SciChat, SciChat, obviously SciChat, like science chat, on Facebook. So just search on Facebook for SciChat and you'll find it. Ask to join the group. That's where the videos get posted every Monday. And then throughout the week, we have a discussion. I'll post more content there, and we have a great discussion. Feel free to ask your questions there about, how SciChat, or, about scientific marketing to the SciChat community, including myself, some other folks from HubSpot, and then just awesome, super smart, in the trenches scientific marketers from around the world will be around to have a conversation with you. So thanks for tuning in, everybody, this week, and I look forward to seeing you in the Facebook group.